Alright guys, if you're watching this video, it's because my internet is not working and it's not working tonight. So I'm using my phone to record the notes instead of the computer. I apologize. Alright, so today we're going to be touching on imaginary numbers. Um, this is a definition for imaginary numbers. It is a number that is expressed in terms of the square root of a negative number, usually the square root of -1, represented by I. So I is the term used for imaginary numbers. Now, just one thing I want to point out is that there is no way to get the square root of a negative number. If you had something like negative, maybe the square root of -9. Ugh, so ugly, sorry. Well, that's not 3 times 3, right? That's not -3 times -3, because -3 times -3 will give me a +9. So then we couldn't get the square root of a negative number. We would just have to stop and say it's not possible. Well, that's where imaginary numbers come in, where we made a definition for that negative so we can actually keep working. So if I wanted to work out the square root of -9, I would separate it into -1 times +9 and then square root them separately. Well, this is I, and then the square root of 9 is 3, and they would go in the front. So it's just a term to separate the negative from a number so we could continue working this out. The reason why we need to know this is so we can continue with quadratic functions. In yesterday's assignment, we didn't have any negatives under the radical, under the square root, but tomorrow we are, or not tomorrow, next week. So we need to know how to square root negative numbers. Now, if I is -1 square rooted, then if I would square I, well, square and square root are opposites of each other. So the I squared is -1. Okay, so two things you need to know there. All right, so how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to break this up into -1 times 147. Then we're going to separate them into their each square root, okay? And we know that -1 is, the square root of -1 is going to be I, okay? So that's going to be I. And then you would play around with 147. You would divide by 2, divide by 3, and I believe 147 divided by 3 is 36, but I'm just going to check. Divided by 3, that's going to be 4, 12, 27. Oh, sorry. 147 divided by 3 is 49. So here I'm going to break this down into 3 times 49. And this is still in a square root, so I'm going to put them in square root. And neither the 3 or the I is going to change. Only 49 is going to change because we can square root 49. So that's going to go in the front, 49. And then we're going to put I next. And then that 3 stayed inside, so it's going to be 7i square roots of 3, and that's as far as we can go. So we're just going to simplify what's inside the radical as far as we can go once we separate the negative from the number. So here we're going to separate that 72 and that negative. So it's going to be -1 times +72 now. Square root, where this is just going to be I, right? The square root of -1 is I. And then 72 can be divided or factored into two numbers. I think this one, if we divide by 2, yeah, for sure this one. 2 times 36 is 72. So then I'm going to square root that and square root that. Now, 2 does not have a square root, but 36 does. the square root of 36 is 6. And then I'm going to bring my I over, and then that 2 stays inside the square root. And this is as far as we can go. Okay. All right, careful on this one because you have a negative outside. So here you're going to have a negative 1 times whatever we get in here. Well, in here, we're going to separate that into negative 1 and 36, positive 36. Then we know that this is going to be I. And then we're going to have negative 1 times I times the square root of 36, which is 6. And then you can do just the regular numbers. Negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. I. So always the number goes first, then the I. Kind of like a variable. All right. Here we have 4 times whatever comes out of the radical. So it's going to be 4 times. And here we're going to separate that negative 1 from the 4. So now I can have a positive 4. And again, I can square root the 4. And this is going to change to an I. So it's going to be 4 times I times the square root of 4, which is 2. And then numbers can multiply normal. So 2 times 4 is 8. So my answer here is 8I. Okay. All right. And this one we didn't have any squares, but we might have some in the next one. So just heads up.